Good morning, fellow Guyanese. This morning I want to address a global issue and one that is critically important for Guyana and for the region, the entire Latin America, Caribbean region. And of course, an issue with immense consequences in the global economy. And of course, this is an issue that every serious stakeholder, whether private sector, policymaker, this is an issue that is occupying important spaces of discussion, policy making, and important analysis. The implications of the ongoing war in Iran is far reaching. The consequences of this war is not only the immediate impact, but a long term impact of rebuilding, the disruption in global supply chain, the destruction of important and critical global infrastructure that would enable price stability, whether it's refined products and all products associated with gas, petrochemicals, including, of course, fertilizer, glass, mineral, everything that is linked to the energy ecosystem. So I want us first to understand that the consequences of this war is not short term. The impact would be felt in the coming years, especially given the level of disruption that has already taken place. Now, first of all, we have to understand that this crisis, this war, has led to a global energy crisis, and it has created the largest supply disruption in the history of the global supply system. According to IEA, that is the International Energy Agency, the conflict has created, and I quote, the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. So first we have to understand this, that we are operating in a period of global history when the largest supply disruption has taken place in the global oil market. The Hormuz choke point, as it is defined, is a narrow waterway. But this narrow waterway is a critical checkpoint through which approximately 21% of global oil supplies pass through per day. That is equivalent to 15 million barrels crude per day and 6 million barrels of petroleum products per day. So every single day, you have 21% of global oil supplies disrupted. And remember, this has been going on for a number of days. So imagine a backlog. That is 15 million barrels of crude per day and 6 million barrels of petroleum products per day. Secondly, through this choke point, 19 to 22% of liquefied natural gas, LNG, representing 110 to 115 billion cubic meters of annual gas shipment. That is 22% of annual gas shipment. Completely disrupted. And 1/3 of the global seaborne fertilizer trade access daily. Daily. 1/3 of the daily fertilizer supply to the global market. 30% of global LPG trade, 35% of naphtha, 30% of condensate, 25% of diesel, and 20% of gasoline shipment passes through this Hormuz Strait, this choke point. All of that is affected for weeks now. What this has led to is widespread volatility. Supply chain shocks are now causing severe disruptions to all nations dependent on imported gas, fuel, fertilizer, and refined products. So, our policy makers must understand this. They must understand the implications of this and stop monkeying themselves around as if we are operating in a normative environment. These are the realities the world is operating in. If you look at the supply shocks and the destruction in the global economy, what would this contribute to? One, already the assessment. The World Food Program has estimated that the conflict will push 45 million additional people into acute hunger by mid-2026, potentially reaching record levels of global hunger. So as a consequence of this, the World Food Program is projecting an increase in acute hunger by 45 million additional people that potentially will reach record levels of global hunger. Secondly, what is happening to fertilizer prices? Between February and March 2026, urea prices surged by nearly 46% month on month. Understand this. It's 46% month on month, with higher prices expected to play out in the months ahead. This is the reality. This is what farmers, the food ecosystem, and governments will be faced with. Because of demand and supply. Just because of what is happening on the supply side as a result of the challenges on the Hormuz Strait. Additionally, it is projected that food price inflation will increase rapidly on the global level. For a matter of fact, some projections see 50% of low-income countries reporting increases in food inflation between the last quarter of 2025 and the first quarter of 2026. 50%. We also see massive increase in global fuel prices at pumps in every single country in the world. Here in Guyana, we are one of the few countries, less than 1%, and maybe the only country in this region that has completely removed excise tax, taxes on fuel import, refined products. So what is happening with global oil price trends, referred to as the Brent crude, as a result of this conflict? The pre-conflict baseline saw prices between $55 to $60 per barrel. That is before the war. The conflict caused prices of crude oil to skyrocket in several waves. Early March, we saw the initial volatility. Prices went to $82 per barrel. Within days of the conflict, mid-March, with a de facto closure of the strait, the prices peaked at $119 to $120 per barrel. The current status is, despite the April 8th ceasefire, prices continue to hold at $115 due to ongoing infrastructure assessment and shipping delays. You have to understand that transport costs has increased, which means that all goods and services costs will be impacted. You have to understand that insurance costs for maritime traffic has increased. Pilotage fees has increased. Risk allowance for persons working on the ship has increased. All of this is outside of the price increases itself. So understand the multiplier effect of all of this on the global economy. And then now I want to speak a bit about the regional impact. The burden of the surge in oil prices has trickled down to consumers globally, with significant variation by region. In Asia, which include China, India, Japan, and South Korea, these nations are the primary destinations for oil transiting the strait. In 2025, approximately 80% of the barrels going through the strait went to the Asian markets. The net food importing in developing countries, countries in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, are facing welfare losses. Imagine this. They are facing welfare losses 10 to 20 times larger than those in the United States, as higher fuel costs drive up the price of basic transportation and food. This is the World Economy 2026, the Kiel Institute. That is the Kiel Institute stats so far in 2026. Countries in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa facing welfare losses. What is welfare losses? Social benefit, social services that will impact education, electricity, energy, fuel. Then in Latin America and the Caribbean, this is the region we are in, the region is highly vulnerable to its dependence on imported fuel for power, to agriculture, to tourism, and all of that. It is expected that this region will face a massive impact. Already, we are seeing the aviation sector adding a fuel surcharge. That will affect tourism. In turn, that will affect all of the countries dependent on tourism. Increase in the cost for fertilizer, increase in the cost for shipping. Most of our products, whether it be food or imports, construction, material, all of that will be impacted as a result of what is happening. Now, the question is why prices will remain elevated. Even though hostilities have slowed, several factors are keeping prices from crashing back to pre-war level. One is the infrastructure damage. Key facilities like the Raslaffen complex require years of repair, permanently capping short-term capacity. So because of some of the key infrastructure that were damaged or destroyed in this war, we have capacity constraint. It will take years before these facilities will operate back at optimal capacity. So it will impact supply while we have a growing demand. If you have a growing demand and supply continues to be restricted, price will go up. That is a natural flow of economics. Then we have the logistics backlog. April saw a production shut in, 9.1 million barrels per day trade flow. Reorganization will take months. Now the entire supply flow, the process engineering, you have to now have a reorganization of the entire flow. That is a reorganization of 9.1 million barrels per day. Of course, this will take months. And then you have refinery scarcity. Specific crude grades required for diesel and jet fuel were cut off, doubling prices for kerosene-based products. And this is the international market. This is the reality. Guyana is not an island by itself. We are part of the global system. And we will import these challenges, we will import these inflation, and we will import the consequences of a conflict far beyond our shores. But we are part of a global system. Then we have the breaking the Middle East nutrient hub, the fertilizer market shock. The Middle East produces roughly 10% of the world's urea, with Qatar and Iran being among the largest global exporters. The GCC, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait, over 70% of the GCC food imports, including agricultural inputs like fertilizer, arrive via the strait. All of this has been locked out. So the impact, the medium and long-term impact of the global food system has not showed its full head as yet. That assessment and that impact will emerge in a greater way in the coming weeks ahead of us. The UAE and Iraq have also been hit by Iran's blanket ban on fruit and vegetable export, which redirected domestic supply for wartime survival. And in South Asia, India and Pakistan, highly dependent on import nitrogen-based fertilizer, which is urea and ammonia, for large-scale grain production, their price also will escalate. In sub-Saharan Africa, farmers in this region often lack the capital to absorb 40 to 60% price spikes in fertilizer, and that is what they're faced with, leading to reduced crop yields and worsening food insecurity. And this is the World Bank 2026 and the Kiel Institute for World Economy 2026 evaluation of the current situation. Closure of the Strait of Hormuz severed 30% of global fertilizer trade. This is according to the IFDC 2026 report. Now let's look at what the nutrient price spikes look like. Fertilizer prices spiked by nearly 46% between February and March 2026. Nitrogen, urea, this has been the hardest hit. Prices have risen more than 70% since the start of 2026. In the US, New Orleans, urea recently hit $692 per ton, compared to roughly $400 per ton a year ago. A $292 increase per ton within the last year. Phosphate, price have climbed to approximately $770 to $885 per ton. This is driven by the fact that roughly 50% of the world's sulfur trade, essential for making phosphate fertilizer, passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Potash, primarily sourced from Canada, Russia, and Belarus. Potash prices have risen indirectly due to increased shipping costs and affordability stress as farmers scramble for any available nutrients. So it's not only about prices, it's availability. Because even if you have the ability to pay, the availability on the market is not there because of the disruption. And this is why clearing the strait and addressing in a rapid way the disruption in the global market is so important and so critical for the global economy and ecosystem. Then let's look at what is happening with natural gas and farming, the energy costs and agricultural impact. The closure of the strait has paralyzed exports from Qatar, the world's largest LNG supplier, which accounts for nearly 20% of the global market. Japan and South Korea, these countries are at high risk of industrial shutdowns and energy shortages because LNG is a critical component of their power generation mix. Just imagine if this industrial and manufacturing shutdown occurs, what will be the consequential impact, additional consequential impact on the global economy? Look at what's happening with China and India. Approximately 75% of the LNG exports from Qatar and the UAE are directed towards these four Asian giants under long-term contracts, not short-term. And already we see Qatar addressing the issues of long-term contract and disruption in long-term contract. What that will do? It will slow manufacturing and industrial development. It will slow the manufacturing of important goods for the global market. It will slow digitization. So these are the long-term impact. We in Guyana will have to navigate. It's not a simplistic social media post. This is critical thinking, critical analysis, policy shift and policy reorientation, consistent dialogue, being on the phone, being in the discussions, being at the table 24/7 to minimize the impact and disruption, and then coming up with an additional menu of measure that will continue to safeguard our ecosystem to minimize the impact on the Guyanese population. In Europe, although Europe has reduced its dependence on Russian gas, the loss of the Gulf LNG as a bridge fuel has kept energy prices volatile and contributed to increased energy poverty in southeastern Europe. It has widened energy poverty increase energy poverty, increase the lack of access to energy. So Europe is also faced with major challenge, and their challenge is magnified because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Then fertilizer is solidified gas. With 20% of global LNG blocked, plants in Europe and Asia have shuttered due to unprofitability. So plants are now assessing the profitability of acquiring input at the current rates, and they're deciding to shut production or slow production to a bare minimum in the current environment. 70% of US farmers reported they cannot afford sufficient fertilizer for 2026. 15 to 20% application rates yield risk. The application rates in Brazil and India are expected to drop by 20%. That is the application of fertilizer. So farmers now are going to use less fertilizer. So their yield is going to be different. The exposure is going to be different. And then we have massive transition now from corn to soybean to mitigate high nitrogen costs. So because of the need for nitrogen for corn, farmers are now moving to soybean, which use less nitrogen as a mitigation factor. So even the supply chain, so think about corn oil and soybean oil. If you have less corn in the system, less corn oil in the system, more soybean in the system. So consumer choices also will shift. And that is why it's important that that this is important even for the ordinary man, everybody. Because even the consumers now are going to change their consumption pattern as a result of these cost shifts and changes in the global market. The impact of the conflict on refined products. Roughly 25% of global jet fuel exports and a significant portion of world LPG, that's the liquefied petroleum gas, transit through the Persian Gulf. The volatility factor. Refined products have proven more volatile than crude oil due to the specialized nature of the Middle Eastern refineries and the immediate chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. The crisis has moved beyond the Middle East, impacting aviation, domestic heating, and industrial logistics worldwide. And of course, we know with the summer heat coming in many parts of the world, including the Middle East, the demand for gas and fuel also will increase. North American jet fuel prices have spiked 95% since the start of the conflict, jumping from $2.50 per gallon to $4.70 per gallon. We have seen massive cancellation in Asia and Europe due to physical fuel shortages, not only because of the prices, but the shortage of physical fuel. Southeast Asia, which relies heavily on Gulf export, faces the most critical supply deficit. We have emergency fuel surcharges implemented across major carriers, increased baggage and ancillary fees to offset a 30% hike in annual fuel budgets. So that is what we're seeing. Airlines are passing this on to the consumer. When you look at with the Strait of Hormuz effectively impassable, LPG exports from Qatar and the UAE have plummeted. What we see? Regional rationing measures. India capping industrial gas use and rationing commercial LPG. Indonesia and Pakistan moving to half-filling cylinders to redistribute limited supplies to more households. Nepal, strict cooking gas rationing and bans on non-essential travel. The price impact. Market prices for non-subsidized households have doubled, following a 10 million barrel per day supply drop in March. In Guyana, the long-term investments that we are making in our own gas plant and gas bottling plant will see us building up internal capacity to withstand certain shocks because we'll have our own natural gas. We'll control the price of energy by managing through our own natural gas the cost, bringing down the cost of energy by half, so that we will have stable fertilizer, stable gas, stable industrial and manufacturing opportunities because we manage and we'll be able to manage the cost of our own power. And now we're in serious discussion back to have a refinery here in Guyana for national security and the fertilizer plant for national and regional security. Only yesterday, I had a conversation with the president of DR and other stakeholders to see how we can come up with a plan ahead, because we have to now use this as an additional step in the learning curve that the entire world is going through. The entire world is reorienting its system as a result of what is taking place. The trickle-down effect of these fuel hikes has hit the global delivery system. The fuels, what we see, major logistic providers like FedEx, Amazon, and USPS have implemented or increased fuel surcharges in response to the rising cost of diesel and jet fuel. So the scarcity of naphtha, another refined product from the Gulf, is beginning to impact the plastics, because plastics depend on naphtha, petrochemical industries in Asia, which could lead to higher prices for consumer goods by summer. This is the projection. In 2026 outlook and the long-term risks. Persistent global food and energy insecurity. The fragility of the ceasefire, mid-April ceasefire, has not yet stabilized the market. Inventory hoarding remains high. Protectionism. More exporters like China have halted fertilizer exports to protect domestic food security, and that is why domestic security is important and what is referred to as a slow fall. Analysts warn prices will not crash post-war, crash back to post-war due to the massive backlog and time required to restart chemical plants. 2026 is projected to be a primary driver of global food inflation through 2027. What this is leading to is radical rethinking of energy mix. Long before this crisis, as you know, my government implemented several initiatives to make our gas energy more secure. The Gas to Energy project, investment in renewables such as solar and hydro. We provided incentive for hybrid and electric vehicles, provide incentive for agriculture processing, value creation, and investment. The Gas to Energy will provide the country with LNG and fertilizer in the near future. And over the next 5 years, we will look towards completing the Gas to Energy 2 projects, project in Berbice, with the former cement ourselves as a major supplier within the region and create energy security within the region. Encourage the efficient use of electricity at home through the promotion of solar home system. So we have been carefully assessing the situation. We are in conversation every single day with global players in the global market, and we are making the decisions that will protect the people of our country, and protect our region, because it's important that the region also remains strong. So I just wanted to spend some time this morning on Tea on the Terrace to outline and to give a full explanation as to what is happening on the global, in the global system, so that Guyanese can understand fully the implications of what we face, and not these wannabe policymakers who believe that putting a social media post is managing systems and managing policies. You have a responsible government, a government that is ahead of the planning cycle, and one that is ready and willing to make the necessary adjustment and to take the steps that will secure our economy, not only for today, but in the long term, ensuring resilience, sustainability, and prosperity. Thank you, and God bless all of you.